dying is expensive.
Why are people inclined to do a will? What is a will and what does it even protect, if anything?
I can't just help people build a legacy. I have to help them protect it. We want to make sure we can get the help we need when we need it for ourselves, for our kids. Dying is not cheap, right? Just the funeral arrangements itself is a big thing. You need to make sure that you don't set your child up for a big mess. The court's going to decide who's going to manage the money and how. The court's going to decide who's going to be caring for them. It's not always what you want.
Today I have Melinda Grimaldi, who is not only my title attorney, she's a dear friend. She works on estate planning and a bunch of other things that a lot of us don't even know. So I want to start off, number one, by you introducing yourself and letting us know all the different things that you do now, because it's not just title anymore, it's estate planning and other things. So let's start off with that.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Melinda Grimaldi. I am a real estate and title attorney and an estate planning attorney. So my family's always been involved in real estate. That's what got me into the legal space and the real estate space. But very quickly after I started my practice and being a title attorney and doing closings, we're helping people acquire assets and build this legacy. But if you don't protect the legacy, then you risk all these problems happening. And then I became a mom, and then I ended up doing my own estate planning, and it took me years to do my own estate plan. And so after I went through kind of seeing what happens when people don't plan and they're trying to sell the real estate that they inherited, dealing with my own estate planning for myself, for my kids, for my parents, and that it all kind of culminated to, well, I can't just help people build a legacy, I have to help them protect it. And so here we are talking about it all.
Yes. So let's start with the basics, because a lot of people don't even know what estate planning is. A lot of people have the misconception that as long as they have a will, like they're okay and that's all they need to have, because at least I come across that a lot with my buyers, with my sellers, with my clients. And there's a lot of clarification that needs to happen for those people.
Yeah, so what a lot of people don't realize is that a will does not avoid probate, which means whether you have a will or not, your family will need to go through the probate system to be able to have access to your assets, whether it be cash, in the bank, or it be real estate or anything else. A good estate plan makes sure that we avoid court involvement at multiple levels, whether there's incapacity issues or upon your passing. We want to make sure we can get the help we need when we need it for ourselves, for our kids. And we want to make sure that upon our passing, that our spouse, our children, our loved ones don't have to go through the whole problem of probate, because probate in Florida takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months. It costs on average 10 grand or 3% of your estate. And it's just creates a total freeze of everything that's in your name.
So you say that on average, it takes 9 to 12 months to go through the probate court system?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And during that time, assets are frozen. You can't sell, you can't rent, you can't access bank account money. It has to just stay in the process. Now, there are ways to ask for exceptions, right, and permission to sell. Right. But during that time, the assets are frozen, but the debts and the bills are not. So, mortgage payments are still due, taxes are still due, insurance is still due, all those things still add up. Association dues or HOA dues are still due. And most of the time, families cannot afford to take care of their bills and somebody else's. And so that's how we end up with properties that are going through the probate process, end up also going through the foreclosure process.
For someone like I did my estate planning with you, thank God. And so for someone like me, I just have one property. Some people think that, I don't have a lot of assets. I don't have, multiple properties. I just have my own home. What do you recommend to them? Like, why do you stress the importance of it anyway? Or even when they don't have a home at all?
Well, for someone like you, for example, minor children cannot inherit, minor children cannot take care of themselves. So no matter what you own, whether it's just be cash in the bank or real estate or some combination of the two, you need to make sure that you don't set your child up for a big mess. Because what happens when you leave assets, when you don't do anything, your assets will go to your kids, but if they're minors, they'll have to not only go through the probate process, they'll have to go through the guardianship process, meaning The court's going to decide who's going to manage the money and how. The court's going to decide who's going to be caring for them and how. And it's not always what you want.
Right.
And it's not always what's best. And it chews up a lot of money that should be used to take care of for your son's future, for your kid's future. So we want to minimize the exposure of wasting money to start off with and creating immediate access. Because think about, for a young child like yours, something were to happen, God forbid, to you, a guardianship would have to be started and continue every year to manage that money until he's 18.
Got it. Okay.
And that is just chewing up resources, right? And if you're leaving assets like a piece of real estate to a minor, not only do you have the probate issue, but you have the guardianship issue. So to be able to sell it, have you ever done a closing where there was a guardian that had to sign off on everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is a huge mess.
Yeah, it's a very messy scenario. Yeah. So we want to avoid that. We want to save resources. We want it to have access right away. And then on top of that, we want to make sure that in that time period, the guardian for your son wants to sell the property because they're going to move in with the guardian.
Right.
Well, then what are we going to do with the house?
Right.
It has to be sold. Well, it's going to get stuck. Can't be sold right away because it has to go through the
I also had a listing where it was a minor child, there was the guardian, but then there was also the trust managers that were all involved. So everybody had to make decisions on the sale of the property, the price, who was the listing agent, everything. So it definitely a lot longer.
Yeah, it delayed. And then in the meantime, you can't sell, you can't rent, and you got to pay those bills, taxes, insurance, HOA, mortgage payment, all that stuff.
Right.
So we want to make sure, when people come to me, because I also do probate, because it's a natural part of being able to do estate planning and real estate is like, it ends up, some people don't plan. Right. And when they don't plan and their families come to me to help them get the assets out of the probate system, let me tell you, they're usually distraught. They're usually financially strapped. They usually don't have access to the extra funds. They got to borrow to do all this. They just have to, because, dying is expensive.
Yeah.
Dying is not cheap, right? Just the funeral arrangements itself is a big thing. And then on top of that, adding the probate process and the waiting game, the collateral damage, people can't afford that. And the average family is not planning to avoid that. The average family is moving straight towards that. And the average family is the one who's going to get the biggest damage from not having the cash liquidity, to be able to do all that stuff that they need to do.
I remember when I did mine, I think that for a lot of people, it is definitely difficult to have to answer those questions because they're tough questions to answer, right? Especially, I consider myself still young, I like to say, So having to answer questions about death, what do you want to happen when you die? Going through those questions is definitely difficult. And I can understand how someone would not want to sit down and go into that dark space to answer those questions because it's tough.
It is tough. I mean, it took me 8 years to do mine.
Right.
And I do it for a living.
You do it, right.
Facing our mortality is not easy.
Right.
Answering those difficult questions is not easy.
Right.
But, we say we'll do anything to protect our kids or to take care of our family. And this is one of those things. So do your actions line up with what you say?
I agree.
That's what we got to ask ourselves, right?
Yeah. And going back to even the cost of dying being expensive, I remember filling out the questions and I was like, okay, I don't care what happens to my body after, whatever's cheaper, whether it's putting me under the ground, putting me on a wall, burning me, I don't care, whatever's cheaper. Because at that point, it's like I don't want to put the burden on my one poor child.
Yeah.
So then going back to what we spoke about earlier, why are people inclined to do a will? What is a will and what does it even protect, if anything?
The will just says who gets what. And the will says who's in charge of administering who gets what. So sometimes it makes no difference, right? Because if, for example, for you, you're a single mom, you have one son. The default Florida law will give everything to your son. So for you, it makes no difference just to have a will. It's like having no will. It doesn't make a difference. What you need is a step up from that to make sure you avoid what happens if he inherits, right? But some people, the default Florida law is not, what they want. They don't want to leave it to their children. They don't want to leave it to their spouse. They don't want to leave it to their parents, depending on, what your family lineage is at this point and who's alive is who it goes to. Right. And if you don't want it to go to, or if you're unmarried and have a long-term partner and you want it to go to them, well, the default Florida law. So there's the advantage there of who gets what, but then who gets what still has to go through court.
Right. That makes sense. And then why would someone who doesn't even have kids do an estate plan? Doesn't have kids, doesn't have property. Why would they be inclined or need to do an estate plan?
So that's all about understanding a person's goals, right? So an estate plan is a foundational protection layer. We have insurance for getting into a car accident. We don't know if we'll ever get into a car accident, but we know we're going to die. So no matter what, we want to make sure, whether you have a kid or not, that your loved ones don't have to go through the whole process of dealing with the aftermath of a death and the probate, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to have that smooth transition. And if you look at what it costs to get a plan and what it costs, what it avoids, it's actually an investment in the future versus, a cost, right? Because if you look at someone like myself who has two minor children and a husband, we risk double probate and 4 guardianship cases, right? For incapacity as adults and for minors inheriting and guardianship. So that's 6 cases. They're all minimum 10 grand each.
Right.
So I have 10 grand of attorney's fees and costs lined up, and that's bare minimum, depending on how long incapacity lasts or how long they will be minors. So,
that's like $60,000 you avoided.
Correct. Never mind the collateral damage, right? Because if real estate can't be sold, if real estate can't be rented, you definitely have collateral damage. Right. If your family doesn't have access to the liquid assets in the account, you definitely have collateral damage, because then you can't pay bills, you can't maneuver things, you can't rent and at least cover your expenses. It turns into a big problem for families. And so there's the hard cost, and I always talk about the collateral damage.
The other thing that I didn't know when doing the estate planning, obviously, which I touched up a little bit a few minutes ago, is like part of that is answering those difficult questions, right? Who's going to take care of you if you're in a vegetative state or whatever? You can't make decisions for yourself. Who's going to make those medical decisions? Who's going to, if you don't want to be hooked up to, cords for the rest of your life, who's going to pull a plug, and those are things that are conversations that I had to have with my family while I was doing the estate plan, that I didn't even, I guess, pure ignorance, right? I didn't even know that was part of the whole package. All I thought when estate planning came around was like, okay, probate, avoiding probate, and making sure my son was okay. But the difficult questions of like the medical, the financial, the first, second, third, I was like, and those are things
the backup option of the backup option.
Right. And those are things that, most people don't know that. Most people don't know that. And I wanted to stress that on here as well. Those questions need to be answered.
So I would say the majority of attorneys that do estate planning, they always combine incapacity planning with the death planning, because they go hand in hand. And also because the damage sometimes is even worse, because guardianship is super cumbersome. So we want to make our own decisions. We want to give permission in advance for someone to make decisions for us, so that they don't have to ask permission to help you. Imagine your mom, your sister having to ask the court permission, pay 15 grand in attorney's fees and costs with medical exams and all the attorneys that are needed, and say, hey, judge, allow me to help my sister, allow me to help my daughter.
Right.
Put me in charge, please, instead of you just putting them in charge. So not only are you making sure you get the help you need as soon as possible, you're making sure that they don't have the burden of having to go through all those steps to help you. Right. Because once you turn 18, your parents have no rights over you, and vice versa. So even with parents that are out there that have adult children, especially if they still rely on you, 18, 20, 22, those young adults, you want to make sure that you could speak to their doctors and help them out and do all that stuff. So it's super critical as a mom. So as a mom doing planning, I always make sure that my clients have these types of documents also for their young adult children, not just protecting the minors.
Yeah. And it's definitely super important to have. I'm super grateful that I did that. It gives you a sense of comfort, relief, you know, knowing that God forbid something happens to me, my son is taken care of. And even knowing that I am a single parent and his dad did it too, we both did it and we're both covered for him, or covered him basically, is a very comforting feeling.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, let everybody know how they can reach you. Let everybody know how they can get in contact with you, whether it's for title, whether it's for probate, whether it's for estate planning.
Yeah. So if you just search Grimaldi Law Firm on Instagram, on Facebook, on the web, you'll find us anywhere. Our main office is in Hollywood. We service the entire state. And so with that, you could schedule an estate planning discovery call if you're interested in estate planning for you and your family, or if you're looking into help in the real estate space, whether you're a realtor, lender, or buyer or seller, we can help support you in your transactions. So the same information there. I'm also CEO of the Closers Title Insurance Agency, so we can support you on the title side, real estate side, either way.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we also have one more thing. We have a bi-weekly webinar that we do for estate planning, which I think is a great starting point. A lot of people I don't know where to start. I think that's a great place to start, because it really breaks down how your life will look like with or without a plan, or with the different options, right? No plan, will-based plan, and a trust-based plan. And you'll see the results. We do some scenarios and role playing there. So it really allows families to understand the process. And then from there, we can go to the next step. But if you don't know what you don't know, how can you act on it, right? So yeah.
Perfect.
If you look us up, you'll find that information as well. Thanks, everyone.